Hi, this is Tristan, aka the Widget King. Today I'm going to be making a lesson on how you load objects from a library into your widget. Now for this lesson I'm going to assume that you already know a bit about ActionScript programming, because it's going to take me too long to explain the concepts otherwise. But there are plenty of resources on the web to help you learn it. So to start off with, I already have most of my widgets set up here. I'm using the new widget creation method, which means I've got a separate class here for my properties dialog mode, which is over here. Now in this code you'll see I already have a button set up, and inside Captivate I already have my widget loaded in. What I want to happen in this widget is that when I click the load from library button, I'll have a dialog appear from Captivate which will allow the users to pick a library object to load into the widget, and then if it's an image or an animation, I want that image or animation to appear inside the widget where we can see it, and if it's a sound, I want it to play back inside the widget. Okay, so let's go about creating that widget. First of all, I have this onClick function here which is going to run when that button is clicked, so I'm going to put the majority of our code in there. Now to bring up that dialog from Captivate, which allows the users to browse through the library, what you have to do is type in this library.browse, and that will do that. This is going to trigger a synchronous operation, which means the widget is going to pause. No code is going to play back in it while the Captivate user looks through this library list and picks an object. Once they've done that and clicked OK, then this browse function is going to return some information to us. So to see what information that is, I'm going to trace it out using the Widget Debugger, which I've already set up here. Widget Debugger.debug, and the message is the user wants to load, and then we'll put in whatever library.browse returns as. So just to see here, I have my widget debugger set up here to trace to arthropod, which I have just here. Okay, so I'm going to publish this widget, and then I'm going to go into Captivate and update it. Okay, so you can see by the little red globe that it's already done. So right click update, double click it to open up its properties, and I'm going to click load from library. And here we can see this has already brought up the load select image from library dialog. So inside here I have my audio files and I have my images. Here's a couple from the template that I deleted. And here's a megaphone, and here's an animation. So we're going to see how we can load each one of these. I'm going to pick this image and click OK, and we can see here from arthropod that it's returned a number here. This number is an identification for the object that we want to load from the library. So let's go back to our widget and see what we can do about this. And I'll minimize arthropod because it's a very persistent little application. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of this trace here, and I'm going to save this identification number into a variable. I call it ID. So ID equals library.browse. The next thing we need to do is work out what type of object the user is trying to load. This is very important because take the custom cursor widget for an example where you can load an image from the library to use as your cursor. In that same dialog, as you saw, the audio files are available there. So a cheeky user could try and load an audio file to be used as a mouse cursor, and obviously that is not going to work. So before we go and load this object into our widget, we need to make sure it is of the correct type. And to do that, we'll make a new variable, we'll call it type. And it's a string, and I'm going to go to the library and choose the get resource file type and pass in the ID of the object that we just loaded. So now we can use this type variable to work out what type of object this is. So I'm going to create an if statement and put in type equals file type dot image. Okay, in that case it's an image, and for else it's something else. So the file type.image is inside the WidgetFactory under WidgetFactory core library file type. This is where it starts to get a bit complicated using the library, because when you load an object from the library into the widgets, there are two possible ways that you could do it. There is an external loader and an embedded loader. The external loader uses a method you're probably very familiar with, where you get a file path to the image or to the sound file that you want to load into the widget, and then you find the object in that file path and you bring it in. The embedded loader is a bit different. It works only with images, and what happens there is when Captivate knows you want to load an image, it reduces it into binary code, and then it gives the widget the binary code, and the widget forms that code into the image again. So whenever you're loading an image, not an animation, just an image, you need to use this embedded loader. However, if you're loading a sound or an animation or pretty much anything else, always use the external loader. So let's start off with just using this embedded loader to bring in this image. So I'm going to type in library.load embedded image, and I have to pass in first of all the ID and then a function to be called once this image has been loaded, and I'm going to call that function on internal loaded. I'm going to go down here and do the same for anything aside from an image which needs to be loaded with an external loader. So I'll type in library.load external, type in the ID and also a function to be called once that is done, on external loaded. Now, using the wonderful code completion features of IntelliJ IDEA here, I'm going to create a function for on internal loaded and create another one for on external loaded. Now, these functions are sort of like the event handler that I have up here, where once it's called, information is passed into it. So for example, here, the information about the mouse event is passed into this function. Well, for these functions down here, on external loaded and on internal loaded, WidgetFactory is going to pass in two pieces of information. First of all, it is going to pass in the object that it managed to load, and you cast that as a general type object, which means it could be anything, and also the ID of what object was loaded. I will just copy that and put in those same parameters there for the on internal loaded function. Okay, so let's just start with the on internal loaded function. If you recall, what we want to do with images is we want them to appear inside the widget properties dialog screen there. So we need to make sure that the object that Captivate loaded for us is actually going to be able to do that. So we're going to type in an if statement here that says if object is display object. Okay, in that case we know it's safe. But then we'll have to create another variable that is of a display object type, and we'll have to assign object to that and cast it as a display object. Okay, and then I can add this display object to the display list. So let's publish the widget and have a look at it inside of Captivate and see whether that code works. Okay, little globes turn red, so we know that we can load in a new version. So double click there, click load from library, and I'll pick this megaphone image, click OK. There, bammo, it's appeared. It's done that quite nicely. Okay, but if I go back in here and if I pick the gear cursor, then you'll see that's not loading because we haven't worked out how to use the external loader. We haven't put in any code in there yet. Okay, for the external loader, we know that this could either be a sound or an animation. So we have to do much the same as what we did here for the internal loader. We need to check if the object is a sound. If so, then we know what to do there. And else if the object is a display object, which means it must be an animation. Okay, so just quickly for if it's a display object, we basically want it to run the same code that we've got down here in the internal loader. So I'm just going to do a little cheat and type in on internal loaded and pass in the object and the ID from this one so that it will go down in here. You wouldn't usually want to do this, but in this case, it's just going to save me from duplicating some code. However, if the object is a sound, we're going to put in a new variable called s of a sound type, and it equals object as sound. And then we want the sound to play, which means we'll hear it back here. So I'll make sure my speakers are turned up. Okay, we'll publish the widget, go back into Captivate, wait for Captivate to pick up the new version. There we go. Right click, update, click OK to that dialog box that comes up. Okay, load image from library. We'll start off with the gear cursor. Click OK. There we go. We've got the gear on stage playing back. And then I'll go to the audio and click OK to load that. And just for safe measure, we'll see whether we can load that image still. Yep, there we go. So we've got all those objects loading successfully into the widget properties dialog. However, if you want to then go and load these objects in the stage mode or in runtime, there's still more work you have to do. We're not going to cover that in this lesson, but stay tuned for another lesson where we talk about the embedded and external lists.